You are listening to X Wing Radio.
That's right. I'm David. That's Wesley. And this is X Wing Radio, your weekly broadcast from a galaxy far, far away.
All right, everyone. Do you want to see a really cool trick? Right, look at my shirt. All right, for those of you on podcasts, you are completely confused, but my shirt is so black that you can't see my mic, and I thought it was really cool. So David is over here, like, asking why he decided to start a podcast with me, but I'm amused by the fact that my shirt is so black you can't see my mic. David, what are we doing today? As we just asked
Well,
before we started recording.
today we are talking about the bluest Grand Admiral in the Imperial Fleet.
So what you're saying is that if he stood behind a background of the sky, you couldn't see him.
Exactly. Well, maybe his eyes, because his eyes are kind of red, but
That's true. Also, he's not really the right shade of blue to
no,
be a
no.
sky.
If he stood,
So it's a
if he
little,
stood in front of a blue screen, all you'd be able to see were his eyes.
you would key out him in a blue screen. That's
Yes,
huh.
yes.
That's an interesting thing to think about. Yes, it is. David, who are we talking about?
Well, obviously, we're talking about Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now, an interesting thing to note was most of the characters we have talked about up until now have either been canon to start out with, and then had legend stories told about them, or were just Disney canon and haven't had any legends stories, or were strictly legends and haven't been brought into canon. Yet
You sound like
Thrawn,
you were about to end. You were about to end that. I thought it sounded like, and I was like, we did talk about Mara Jade. So, anyways, but
yeah,
you're on track. You're
yeah,
good.
but yeah,
You're doing a great
Thrawn.
job, David. I don't know if you get told that enough, but you're doing a great job, and I want to congratulate you on that. So let's give David a round of
Well,
applause.
well,
Clap for him real quick. Let's see if we can put in this little soundboard thing. We got a clap right here. Let's see, where's it at? Where's it at? David, don't do anything. I got the claps for you. Here you go. It's a golf clap. I don't know if that gets picked up or recorded or anything, but we're giving you a clap. Round of applause for David putting up with me.
right. But yes, Grand Admiral Thrawn is the
As you were
first
saying,
character that we've talked about that was originally Legends that became canon. Now,
hmm
he's not the only canon Star Wars character who, you know, what was originally Legends, but he is the first we're talking about in this capacity.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Also, he might actually be the first, or he might actually be the only one that actually has that big of a role. Because, okay, like, obviously, like, the other one that comes to mind right off the bat is Alice Kura, who was in from, like, some comics or whatever. I don't even remember what all. She was in from back in the 90s, basically, and George Lucas included her in the prequels.
yeah.
But she barely had any screen time in the prequels, no lines in the prequels,
Well,
and then
well,
didn't
and
have a whole lot in the.
I don't know how much you can even consider that too much because of the fact that before Disney bought out Star Wars, for the most part, while there wasn't a specific, this is specifically how everything fits together, you could tie everything together and it would work more or less with a lot of the comic book stories and the expanded universe stuff because like we've talked about
True.
before, George Lucas signed off on these and let people use his IP, um and all those things. And but when Disney bought it out, they said none of the legends, none outside of the movies is canon anymore. And so all of that became what is, I, is now considered Legends, was the expanded universe, the EU, whatever. But now it's strictly it's until Disney brings it into canon, it's not canon. As
Mm,
far as, it's supposed to go. And this is the first character that was pushed out of what was in anyone's canon and then has been brought back in through first off being Rebels, and then we get to see him again in Ahsoka, and probably, well, not probably, in the movies that they'll be saying that they're going to be making, the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which
mm.
surrounds Thrawn. So,
Which is also interesting too, talking about his live action appearances because he is one of a few. Um, the other one that comes to mind is Katie Sackhoff as Bo-Katan. One of
mhm.
the few that I believe was voiced by the same person who portrays him on screen.
Does Timothy did Lars Nicholson voice him? I
And
thought it was a different
I
voice
want to
actor
say
who
he was.
voiced him.
I want to say it was the voice. Hold up,
Because I thought if you
I
look
could be
him up,
wrong about that.
I'm pretty sure two people come up for it, and obviously Lars Nicholson is the one who plays him on screen. Um,
Lars Mikkelsen comes up when I voice or when I look up uh voice actor for Thrawn.
okay, well, I'm not saying that he didn't. I'm just saying that I thought I remember seeing uh
Yeah, Lars Mikkelsen is a Danish actor who provided the voice of Grand Admiral Thrawn in Star Wars Rebels
okay.
and portrays the character in the live action
I
in the
wonder
Ahsoka
what
television series.
I wonder what it is that I saw. I mean, I do think I remember them talking about how they wanted to get him in, and then finally they decided they came to an agreement, which, I think he does a pretty good job. I do think. Now, here's the thing. In the cartoon version of, you know, Rebels, and they bring Thrawn in, obviously it's a cartoon. So there's an aspect of that, where portraying it on the big screen is going to be different. Um, you're not going to get someone to look exactly like Thrawn. You're not going to get someone to look as skinny as, like, his face is extremely thin and
Well,
long,
that,
and
that's
Lars Nicholson's isn't.
that's
So,
also
like,
just
those are like,
the it's
huh?
also just the Rebels animation style. Every like
That's
even
what I'm
look at the
saying.
Stormtrooper
That's what I'm
armor.
saying.
It's yeah.
They're very thin, and that's not what we got because that's not realistic to real life in
Mm.
all scenarios. Outside of the fact that, you know, may or may not, there were memes going around, I think mostly about them saying he was blue Elon Musk, but, there was stuff going around. But I think honestly they did a really good job bringing him to live action. I obviously had my problems with the Ahsoka series, but with the portrayal of Thrawn, I thought they did a really good job of it. I'm excited to see what they do with the character moving forward. I think Lars Nicholson is do Mickelson it's Mickelson, right? Not Nicholson, because it's
Yeah.
an M, but it's pronounced. Yeah. Anyways, hopefully I'll get that right throughout the rest of it. But y'all know who I'm talking about. I think he did a really good job, and I'm excited to see what he does with it. Obviously, the voice of Thrawn was really good in the Ahsoka series, not in the Ahsoka series, in
Mm.
the Rebels, and to see him come out and be able to portray that very stoic look that
So
Thrawn exudes.
so obviously I don't think we said this earlier, or we prefaced this earlier, but we're talking about Thrawn today because next week we are talking about the novel Heir to the Empire.
hmm We'll be going over
Um,
the next 3 months, the three books in that trilogy, starting off with Heir to the Empire.
yes, yes. So I don't really want to get a whole. We might touch on some of the Legends appearances in Thrawn, but I don't want to I don't want to get too much into that if we're going to repeat it again next week. Repeat some
I
of it
think
again
what
next week.
I think what, and obviously, David, we you and I are very busy. We need to discuss maybe a little more in detail what we're going to talk about when we get onto these things. But I think as far as the fact that we are talking about a lot of what he does later on within the books coming up, we should probably stick to a lot of like his early life as far as like how he gets involved in the Empire, maybe talk about Rebels, some
Mm,
and his first appearances in what is now considered canon, um, and
mm.
whatever else you were planning on discussing within the character. But I
So,
feel like doing that will at least give us a basis for what we're gonna be uncovering when we talk about the Heir to the Empire books and everything.
mm. So first thing I want to point out. So I pulled up or before we started recording, I pulled up the Wikipedia article on Grand Admiral Thrawn. I don't know if you have that or not. So,
Oh,
um,
I haven't pulled it up yet, but I can easily do that. So let me do that while you're talking.
go, go, go ahead and pull it up. I just want your reaction for what you see for this
Well,
this article.
now I'm curious. I thought I pulled it up at one point to scan over it, but what exactly is supposed to draw my eye? Will I know it when I see it?
Probably, yes, yes.
Well, are we talking about his name or am I going to see a picture?
His name. So,
Okay.
yeah, so this is the canon side. I don't know if this is also true of the legends. I haven't switched over to that. So, let me see. So it is listed on the legend side too. But so Thrawn is not actually, well, it is his name, but it's not his full name. I'm gonna try pronounce this. I probably am going to regret saying that. But his full name is Mithranurado.
I think that was pretty good. That was pretty good as far as pronouncing goes with the way
Mithranurado.
this word.
I'm just gonna go with that.
I think
So
yeah.
obviously, well, I'm just going to call him Thrawn for the remainder of the episode because I don't want to try to keep stuff on with that. But
But is how he was born. His birth
yeah.
name.
Um
Hey David, real quick, scroll down a little, or not that much, on this first paragraph where it says, better known by his core name, Thrawn, and then it has pronounced in parentheses, and it has this little like symbols. I wonder what that is as I click on it. Wikipedia can't be sold. What? I don't know. It's just interesting. I saw that thing there and I was like, what is that? And now it's gonna probably bug my computer out. Probably was a virus. It looked like one of those little virus things, but like shorter.
anyway, so uh Thrawn was a Chiss male officer of the Chiss Ascendancy and Grand Admiral in the Imperial Navy during the Age of the Galactic Empire. An alien Imperial officer with striking blue skin, red eyes, and angular face. Grand Admiral Thrawn was well
David, are
known
you
as a
reading
brilliant and versatile strategist. He
the
believed that in order
canon
to
or legend
achieve
sides
victory in
currently?
war, one must know their enemy. As such, Thrawn dedicated himself to understanding the philosophy, art, and culture of his opponents, which included the Twi'leks of Ryloth, the warriors of Mandalore, and the Grisk hegemony. So, one thing that I do think they did a really good job. I don't know how far you've gotten in Heir to the Empire. I don't know if you finished it or whatever. I've already read through it. twice. I might try to read through it again, depending on time. But for next week. But um, one thing that I really liked about, obviously, I watched Rebels before I read an Heir to the Empire. But one thing, looking back, having read Heir to the Empire, one thing that I like about the adaptation of Thrawn in Rebels is the fact that they actually did do a good job with portraying the fact of, you know, how or what makes him such a good strategist that he, does look at all this art to, understand the culture and the mind, the philosophy and the mind of his opponents.
Mhm.
I feel like they
Um,
did a really good job in Rebels of portraying that.
I think also, within that line of thinking, Thrawn is the first, pretty much only big bad that we see that isn't powerful because of his abilities, but is powerful because of his planning. Like, this is a different obstacle to overcome. Like when they're trying to fight, like let's say Luke's trying to fight Vader. Well, what's he trying to do? He's trying to beat him in a duel, more or less. Obviously that's not the whole entire. I'm not trying to dive into the actual original trilogy, but like like Anakin Obi-Wan, that's a duel. But when it comes to like the enemy of Thrawn, and will be interesting to see in the adaptation of the movies that they're planning on making, hopefully, with these books. And within within reading these books, it's very interesting to see just how Thrawn is a different kind of enemy. Like
Mm,
he is someone you have to essentially you have to outsmart him, which is almost impossible to do, it seems like, because
mm.
he's just, one step ahead always.
Yeah, Thrawn, the which I like the dynamic of that because I know I know Star Wars is not necessarily the most, it's not really known for, being well written or anything. But, having a character who is a threat not because of their power, but because of their intellect is a
Hmm.
very interesting dynamic to add into the mix.
Yeah,
Obviously,
go ahead.
obviously they didn't go that route for the sequels, which I kind of wish they had tried to adapt these books for the sequels, but
Yeah.
you know,
Um,
I,
it with what you were saying though too about how he's like he studies the art specifically, but he studies other people's culture so he can figure out what their tendencies are. It's basically like you're fighting against an evil Sherlock Holmes, because like I I've already finished Heir to the Empire. And I know you said you have too, but like when you're going through it, and some of the deductions that he comes to, it's like, honestly, how did you figure that out? Like, you were given this small sample size of information, and through that, you're able to figure out exactly, like, to a T, exactly what they're doing. And, obviously it's a book, but like, there are reasons behind how he's able to deduce those things, you know,
mm,
and it's like, yeah, you're basically going up against evil blue Sherlock Holmes, and that's not easy to do.
mm. So as I mentioned in earlier, kind of bringing it back to his first canon appearance. So that was the season 3 of Rebels. Yes, season 3 of Rebels. That was the whole arc on Ryloth with Thrawn. And of
Mhm.
course, there is that one scene that actually sticks out in my mind is when uh forget who what actually forgetting some of the scene, but I know Thrawn's held up in this Twi'lek house, and he's talking to someone about the art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember what
They're
you're talking about.
bringing in that direct parallel from the books to explain why Thrawn is such a brilliant tactician.
Yeah. Um, what was it I was thinking of? Um, that also, to touch on this real quick, to kind of brush over briefly, I guess, some of his earlier life. So, uh, this is pretty well unheard of that there was a alien, essentially, not non-human, um, im admiral, let alone a non-human Grand Admiral, because of the
Hmm.
bias that Palpatine had, that Sidious had for humans. He obviously, I don't know if we mentioned it in the Plagueis novel when we went over that book, but in the Plagueis novel, there's a point where, so like the Munes are very, very high on themselves and think of pretty much any other life form as beneath them. Well, Palpatine kind of takes on, he kind of, when Plagueis first uh, is introduced to him, Palpatine kind of already has that mindset similar to Plagueis in that humans are kind of just they're the top of the chain here. They deserve everything, yada yada yada. Well, that's the bias that he takes into how he rules the empire. So obviously when you're watching the movies, you know, whatever the reasons behind the scenes are for it, they did not have aliens in many roles within the empire, and definitely not within the higher ups. So the fact that Thrawn is what he is, and he is so high up within the Imperial Navy, says so much about how the Emperor thought of him and how brilliant he really is.
Mhm. Now, part of that, the on the real world side of that, part of that explanation might just be a way to explain, or a way to explain away them or the restrictive costume
Yeah,
budgets in the original trilogy,
yeah,
where they couldn't make everyone an alien. Um,
yeah.
so
I
part
mean,
part of
yeah,
that's that, but essentially in universe, essentially what you're saying is Palpatine's racist, pretty much.
basically, yes.
And
He's a racist. Um,
yeah,
he's a supremacist. But but that speaks to just how impressive Thrawn is. I'm not sure how much this Wikipedia article gets into a lot of how he gets to the Grand Admiral spot, but he he is someone that was very highly thought of. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that the Grand Admirals were kind of handpicked by the Emperor because of how high up they were. Like he is the one that put them into their places.
mhm.
And for Thrawn to be someone of that status just speaks volumes to
And
what how important he was.
but even to
Outside of
that
the fact
point,
outside of the fact that he wasn't that big of a part within, the rebels
but
and all that stuff.
even to that point, yes, Thrawn's the Emperor couldn't ignore Thrawn's accomplishments or Thrawn's ability. That's why he's a Grand Admiral. But at the same
Hmm.
time, the reason, or he's not human, so that's the reason. Both in Heir to the Empire and in uh Rebels, that the Emperor kind of just like, no, you go over here and do that. Just stay over there. Don't don't don't
Small
don't come get
things.
involved over here. Just stay over there.
Yeah. So, as brilliant as the Emperor himself is, probably a pretty big error on his part. Probably
Mm.
should have put his racism aside and been like, "All right, Thrawn, you probably could really help us out." Uh, you know, but It
Mm,
is what it, because I think that's one thing too, is in seeing and listening in the book Heir to the Empire and going through that and listening to it and all. So Tarkin, right, is a very smart, well accomplished, like he's a Grand Moff, right? So you know he's high up, pretty tactical, like he's good within all that. But a lot of what was the problem with Tarkin was the pride that he had. Like he obviously showed some restraint with Vader, but like, he still had you could see a lot of the pride, and that kind of obviously the Death Star blew him up, so that can only be so much. But he also still had a lot of pride within it, thinking that the Death Star couldn't be blown up. Thrawn, like, kind of so far is what I've seen, and obviously I haven't seen what his downfall is, but Thrawn more or less is kind of ready for everything, and like the pride aspect doesn't usually get him. I don't feel like, or at least so far it hasn't, because he doesn't like, he has airtight plans, but then he has backups to those plans, so that he kind of has every basis covered, at least so far in what I've seen when he's designing his plans. There's very few
mm,
ways for him to get caught off guard or to get caught in the trap of, oh, I know exactly what you're doing. He's like, oh, I know what you're doing, but in case you have a backup plan, so do I, kind of a deal.
mm. So some of this, I was just skimming through some of the wiki article here. So some of this does get into his the other Thrawn trilogy, the one that Timothy's on, or the one that Disney hired Timothy's on to write. So there is a canon Thrawn trilogy that takes place before the Empire. So I think that's some of more of his origin. I
Mm-hmm.
don't really know a whole lot about about those books specifically. That would be a good one to a good book series to potentially look into to do on the podcast because
Yeah.
um I know most of what we've talked about are doing has been Legends. I think the only book we've
Mm-hmm.
read that is canon is why am I blanking? Dark Disciple. Um
Yeah, I guess it is technically canon.
or well it's supposed to be, but it,
Well, I think what they said
we talked
was
about that with Bad Batch, but
within that, it was supposed to that they weren't going to disrupt the story of it. But anyways, continue.
mm, um yeah, so that might be an interesting thing to look into is that trilogy. But so let me see here. So I'm gonna skip that paragraph mostly because there are a ton of words that I don't want to try to stumble through trying to pronounce.
A bunch of
Um
names and people groups, and yeah.
yeah. So near the end of the Clone Wars in 19 BBY, the warlike Risk hegemony. Again, names and Star Wars stuff are very hard to pronounce. Began a plot to destroy the Chiss ascendancy. First, they groomed and trained a Nic- Nicardan general named Yiv, who ruled the Nicardan destiny, an, ex- an expansionist empire in the unknown regions. The Grisk agent Jixtus sent Yiv to conquer or intimidate the nations neighboring the Ascendant Sea to encircle the Chiss, who would not launch attacks on anyone. Second read.
Probably not.
Um, yeah, probably not. who had not directly attacked the Ascendancy. Thrawn left his native unknown regions and traveled to the known space to search for allies against Yiv. There he encountered the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars, who fought alongside Skywalker during a mission to Mokajev, or Mokiv, too many,
I'd stick with your
like,
I'd stick with your first pronunciation of it.
it was just wrong, but sure. Shortly thereafter, Thrawn was instrumental in defeating Yiv's fleet, leading to the demise of the Pardon Destiny. So the reason why I wanted to point that out is, um, in I think it's in one of the Vader comics. It references this because I don't know if this story or the story of Anakin meeting Thrawn is in the the comics or if that's in one of the books. But it references this because Thrawn was one of the few people to actually figure out that Vader was Anakin.
Hmm. I also liked, despite the fact that we don't see Thrawn in any of the Clone Wars, meeting like we do at one point see Tarkin, a young Tarkin, but we never get to see a young Thrawn meet Anakin or anything like that. It is mentioned, and I know that Thrawn mentions Anakin in the Ahsoka series, mentioning when he hears uh that Ahsoka is a Padawan of Anakin Skywalker. Um, but he also, I believe they mention it in a sense, or at least you get the idea that there was a point in time that Thrawn actually met Anakin, or witnessed up close and personal
Mm.
his tactics, which you know is a nice little nod to some of the legend stuff that should become canonized because why not?
So one thing too to point out that a lot of this stuff here that I'm kind of glossing over in the wiki article. So basically it's talking about Thrawn's events and stuff, and you for those listening, you can go back and read this article on Wikipedia if you want to get the whole thing, because again, there are a ton of names, and I'm not going to try to stumble over all of them. But basically, it's going over the events of, or the events that Thrawn went through during the Clone Wars.
Mhm.
So the Chiss Ascendancy was doing all this stuff over here in the unknown space, or unknown regions, during the time of the Clone Wars. So basically, I don't know, Wesley, you've probably seen a map of the Star Wars galaxy. So, like, it has all the planets and stuff laid out. It's typical spiral galaxy, but like a third of it is unknown regions, and there's like not much there. Like, I think if you pull up a map, like the only few things that are there are like Exegol and some other just random planets that are in the unknown regions. But basically, I'm pretty sure this is what that the canon Thrawn trilogy talks about is basically all the events that went on there while the Clone Wars was going on in the rest of the galaxy. They were kind of like
Mhm.
two separate pieces of the same galaxy at this point. Because the
Yeah.
Republic was really just in known space.
Yeah, that is one thing to think about within Star Wars, and that a lot of times isn't portrayed too well on the live action, big screen and everything, and mostly just because of time constraints. But you know, just how big the galaxy is, and despite the fact that there's a lot of space travel, and this is mentioned in Star Wars at times, there are people who are native to planets who are basically stuck on that because they don't know how to leave. They don't have the technology to for space travel. Um, and so, there's people like that in the galaxy. There are people in the galaxy who, you know, haven't been reached yet. I mean, it's a huge galaxy in Star Wars.
Hmm.
I mean, uh, it's something that hadn't really hit my mind a whole lot, um, until more recently with reading the Heir to the Empire book, is just how long it takes to get places. Like, I know at one point I think we talked about it within the Empire Strikes Back movie, right? Where the trip from Hoth to Cloud City for the Millennium Falcon, for how long that trip actually took. Like it took like a couple weeks, maybe months or so for the Millennium Falcon to limp to Cloud City. And it's not obviously portrayed on the big screen because, that's not fun to just see people sitting
The
around on the Falcon.
the
So, we don't
only
really see the passage of time for that.
really in Empire Strikes Back, really the only indication that we have that it's been a longer period of time than it seems is Luke's training.
Yeah.
Because,
Hmm.
if you just watched the, Han, Leia, Lando, Chewie bits of Empire, it seems like it's just a few hours. But then
Hmm.
if you watch the Luke training bits, like when he leaves Dagobah, you almost kind of get the impression that he's been there for weeks.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is like you think about it and yeah, like okay, sure, you might be driving going through hyperspace, right? But that doesn't mean like you're still traveling long distances. I think at one point, in the Heir to the Empire books, they jump into light speed, and they're talking about how long it's going to take them to get to their destination, and they're talking it's like a couple days or so to travel that distance, and it's like yeah, they're going to be
So,
in hyperspace for a minute because despite the fact that they're going super fast, it's still a great distance to go.
and that's also another thing too that uh is interesting about space travel in Star Wars. So, I'm not scientific brained enough to fully explain the differences between like warp drive from Star Trek and hyperdrive in Star Wars, but
Yeah.
essentially, from my understanding, the science fiction explanation for the two different things is warp drive from Star Wars basically warps the space around you. So basically where there's like a buildup of space behind you and that's what's pushing you forward. And so
Hmm.
you're traveling like space itself is pushing you and you're traveling less distance because you're pulling the it's kind of confusing. Hyperdrive Star Wars makes a little more sense. It's a little bit easier to understand because it's basically stepping into a essentially like stepping into like the fourth dimension to navigate three-dimensional space.
Hmm. Um,
So you're not
correction on
actually
what
traveling. Hmm?
correction on what you said earlier. Warp drive, Star Trek, not Star Wars. You said Star Wars, so
Oh,
you know,
it is.
just
Yeah.
calling you
Star.
out, David. Just calling you out. Anyways,
I, I know what I meant, but I might have misspoken. So yes, Star Trek is warp drive. Star Wars is hyperdrive. Um, but yeah, so
and
basically hyperdrive,
Marvel is what's it called? It's like hexa hopping or whatever it's called. The little
which
hexagon things they
actually
have.
which is actually kind of similar to Star Wars because there are hyperspace lanes in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
Yeah.
so even
What
though
do they
you're
call it though?
traveling, I don't know what they call it in Marvel though, but
So I don't remember what they call it.
basically, the hyperspace lanes and like the entry points, exit points, like you see this in Rogue One when the Star Destroyer comes out of hyperspace, like right on top of the Rebel fleet. That's because the Rebel fleet was heading to the entrance to this hyperspace lane, and the Star Destroyer comes right out of it. But you kind of see that in that, but essentially the reason for that is though even though you're traveling in a higher dimension, So you're still, if you run into something, you're still running into it.
Yeah, yeah. Which is why the lanes had to be charted, and why whenever like you can't just all of a sudden gun it into hyperdrive mode, because it's not just the rate of speed that you're going. It's a specific like there's a specific path you have to take to go
And
that speed, and the nav computer has to plan
mhm.
out the course for it, and there's stuff like that.
And so basically, that's also why, like, in Star Wars, stuff takes longer to travel because, you might have to, travel several parsecs to get to a hyperspace lane.
Hmm.
That's why the
Yeah,
Kessel Run was so difficult, because you can't just, you know, hyperspace to the planet. You have to hyperspace to this outside of this nebula, then go through this little tunnel to get to it.
yeah. Essentially, you have this little mess of stuff here, and you have to go around it to get where you want to go. The reason they made it in such a short period of time was because they, for some reason, went through it,
Yeah. Um.
which meant that they were able to make the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, which is a measurement of distance, not time.
Yeah, because they had to explain that in Solo, because uh, George Lucas didn't know what he was talking about when he wrote A New Hope.
Essentially, yes. Essentially, yes. But you know what? Nerds have explained it, and it's okay now.
Well, it's like the in Back to the Future. That they
Mm,
mispronounce giga or they mispronounce gigawatts as gigawatts,
yeah.
which is just because apparently they had someone
Wait.
explain it to them and they didn't understand what.
Yeah. Anyways.
But
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Science is crazy.
Mhm. But back to hyperspace. Just real quick, let me finish this tangent, and then we can get back to Thrawn. Um, basically, hyperspace is kind of like the Nether in Minecraft.
Yeah.
You're still traveling the distance. You're just making the distance shorter by traveling in a higher
Yeah.
dimension.
Random tangent on that point. I had in Minecraft, I built two nether portals, right? And completely different, like pretty far apart, right? Well, I go into the one, and then it takes me to where the other one comes out in the nether, and then when I go back into it, I'm at the other spot in the nether, or in the real in the overworld, and I'm just like, what now? So I'm going to go destroy the other one, so maybe I can find a new spot. But yeah, it didn't really work how I wanted it to. I'm not
Yeah, the
entirely sure what I did wrong either.
yeah, in Bedrock Edition, mine or portals are really weird and they can get crossed very easily.
Yeah. So anyways, we're not talking about Minecraft. We're gonna talk about Star Wars. We can talk about Minecraft on a different day. But Thrawn, right? We're talking about Thrawn. Oh, I did
That
want
was
to
like
mention
what, a
this,
20
David.
minute tangent, so we'll
Yeah,
wrap
well,
it.
David, welcome. Hey, welcome all to the to X-Wing Radio. All right, so David, I did want to read this real quick, because this talks about how Thrawn essentially got into the Imperial Navy and got promoted. It's just a short little
Mhm.
paragraph here. Anyways, following the Galactic Republic's reorganization into the Galactic Empire, Thrawn offered his allegiance to Emperor Palpatine, having deemed an alliance with the new regime beneficial to his people. With the help of Cadet Eli Vanto, Thrawn assimilated into galactic society and became fluent in galactic basic standard, and ultimately graduated from the Royal Imperial Academy on Coruscant. His career in the Navy was highly successful. After a series of promotions, he received the rank of Grand Admiral from the Emperor himself. So whether or not it is a thing that the Emperor specifically promotes people, you got a little cheese in your beard or cracker or whatever. Um, but whether or not it is specifically something the Emperor gives, like promotes someone into or not, the Emperor handpicked Thrawn,
Mhm.
as per this thing here, which this is on the canon side. So
Which I would imagine just how rare Grand Admirals are. I would imagine that they are all handpicked, but
Mm-hmm. David, real quick, for your own, well, my thing's glitching out real quick. Just scroll down how f- how many how long this outline is for Thrawn.
mm,
There is there are subsections upon subsections for how much information is about Thrawn. Thrawn is a
and this
despite
is
not
just what we're looking at here is just the canon side.
yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. There's a lot to Thrawn, a lot to his character. We probably should have picked out some specific stuff. Obviously, moving forward, we do have the books that we're gonna talk about with him being the main character of. Um, but there's a lot to what he has done. Um, I'm not entirely sure about all the Chiss um uh rituals or like what all they do, but obviously as spoken or read above, he was a very crucial part of um defeating Yo-Yo, whatever the guy's name is,
Yep.
as well as Yo-Yo, as well as helping with the Chiss Ascension. Um, so he's been around the block a couple times even before joining the Imperial Navy. And then what he goes through within the Imperial Navy, and then what he goes through um with the heir to the Empire trying to rebuild or uh keep the Empire together. Um I will say this. I do like, because of the route that they took with with the sequels. I do like how they explain Thrawn being gone
Mm.
in canon now. I think that's a good explanation for it. What they should have what they should have done is they should have never uh done the sequels. They should have done Thrawn and had some other explanation as to why he was, not around for a large majority of the original trilogy, which I mean is pretty easy to explain away because if you don't have him specifically within the Death Star realm, there's not it's not that hard for him to be
I
someplace
mean,
else dealing
what
with some other uprising.
in Heir to the Empire, they pretty much just said, he was in charge of the Imperial campaigns in the unknown regions, so
Yeah.
he wasn't
Which I mean,
involved in anything in the outer rim, the mid rim, or the core world. So,
which let's talk about that real quick too. So not only was Thrawn impressive enough for the Emperor to promote, despite who and what he is, he also is a bit of it's a bit advantageous for the Emperor to promote him because the Emperor wanted to have reach to the unknown region regions, and Thrawn, obviously being from there, had a better understanding of the people and the area, which is part of why he is put over there, to head up the campaign over there too. Um,
so here's
but
something kind of interesting. So
yes,
I noticed here, so he was born in 59 BBY.
okay,
So that would
my
have put
boy's
him
old.
around like mid 50s in Rebels and around 70 in the Ahsoka series.
Well, how long do their species live?
Probably a long time. I, I mean,
Oh,
any
the Chiss.
non-human species in Star Wars is pretty easy to just say, that they can live a long time. Let me see, Chiss on.
See, I'm looking it up right
Wikipedia.
now to see if I can find it.
I don't
But
see anything about life expectancy.
yeah, they don't have a lifespan there. I mean, how many Chiss do we have? We got Thrawn.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. So, basically they can say he lives for however long they want him to live and then, go from there. This is also the canon side, so let me go to the legends. Let's see. Average lifespan, this is on the legend side, says up to 80 standard years.
So
But he
Thrawn's
seems in pretty good shape in
for
the
being
Ahsoka series.
for being 10 years away from life expectancy.
Yeah.
But you said
So
that was the legend side?
that was the legend side for the Chiss. Yes.
Yeah, so that's okay. See that would make sense then.
Uh,
Alright, let's
yeah,
see
and
here.
obviously they can do what they want within the character. If they want to make him live longer, I mean, what we gonna do about it, you know? But
I mean,
blah, 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 blah.
I don't even know what that legends number is based off of. It might just be based off of the fact that Chiss are vaguely humanoids, so they you know
I
probably
mean,
have
that's very true too.
human-like lifespans. I don't know what a lot of this stuff is based on. So
Yeah.
there
Now,
might be
also
something in
to
the books that specifically said in one of the books that specifically says Chiff's lifespan is around 80 standard years, but we just don't
yeah.
really know.
Um, to be fair to Grand Admiral Thrawn, he is, at least per the Rebel series, um, relatively physically fit. He, you know, keeps up with like martial arts, um, and hand-to-hand combat, for any time he gets in those specific scenarios, so he's not unprepared, but also as physical exercise to stay in shape, he does that as well. So, obviously as humans, you know, life expectancy and how long people live don't always correlate. There are people who live longer, much longer, and who even at later ages in life still seem to be in decent shape. So, Thrawn could just be an exception. They also could completely change the book because, like we said, Thrawn is pretty much the only example of the Chiss that we have, at least in canon for sure. But,
Hmm. Yeah. I was looking through here on the Chiss thing to see if there were any other. It doesn't have anywhere listed of like example or like appearances of Chiss. So I would Thrawn might be the only Chiss we see in canon. Because I was looking at this because some of these pictures don't look like Thrawn, but I don't know. I wasn't
yeah,
sure if like in some of the comics or whatever they might have had other Chiss or in some of the books where about Thrawn's earlier life. I don't know if there would, which I guess there would have been other Chiss in those, but it's just kind of interesting. Anyway, um, now, one thing kind of interesting about Ahsoka, so or Thrawn in the Ahsoka series. So again, I'm gonna try not to get too much into Heir to the Empire. This pertains a little bit to it, book that
hmm
is. Um, so in the book, Thrawn recruits the help of a Dark Jedi. We'll get more into that because there are some other interesting things to talk about with this character from the books. But
yeah,
I don't want to get into that right now because I want to save that for next week. But essentially Thrawn recruits the help of a dark Jedi to help in his um to help uh
Well, to
communicate or to help basically keep all of
battle
his troops
meditation,
and stuff. Hmm?
meditation
Yeah,
is what
so
he's asking him for.
yeah, essentially the reason a lot of stuff like a lot of the a lot of times when the Empire was in battle, the reason that they were so coordinated was because the Emperor or Vader was meditating and control. Again, this is from Heir to the Empire. It's not necessarily, it's not canon, but in Heir to the Empire stated that the reason that the Empire was so coordinated was because the Emperor or Vader was meditating and basically control or not necessarily
Well,
controlling, but coordinating all of the forces through the Force.
now it may not be specifically canon, but in a way it kind of is in the fact that when the Emperor died, everything was chaos because while you can say okay their leader's dead, the Emperor was very limited in what he actually did within the Empire for the most part, especially in those later years. He was more off doing his own thing, um, and had just more people report to him and stuff like that.
Mm.
So he did have an influence over what was going on within his ranks, and a lot of it probably did stem back to battle meditation,
But
whether it's specifically said or not in canon. But yeah.
my the connection I made when reading Enter the Empire with that, in light of Ahsoka, is the Great Mothers.
Hmm.
I could be wrong about kind of the way they're going to go about that, but essentially, what if in Dave Filoni's Heir to the Empire, the Great Mothers kind of take, which again, I also don't know how how much of this is going to follow the book. Obviously, they're going to have to change a lot because the book follows Han, Luke, and Leia.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the like Thrawn's plan they're going to keep the same. So it's kind of interesting that in Heir to the Empire, Thrawn realized that yeah, he's a brilliant tactician, but he can't do everything because he doesn't have the Force. So he recruits this Dark Jedi.
Mm.
In the actual canon side, he realizes he can't do everything, so he recruits these Night Witches or Night Sisters.
Now, let me ask you this. All right, just simply for name drop's sake, we're not going to dive into it. But obviously the Dark Jedi that you're talking about is Sabayoth.
Hmm.
But Jorah Sabayoth. But I don't. How would you feel if they don't bring Sabayoth into canon? Because he's an interesting character, and I would like to see more from
So
him. But how would you feel about it?
I don't know. I feel like that would be an interesting character to bring into canon. Obviously, they would have to change a lot, or not a lot, but they have to change one big thing about the character, which I don't want to mention right now because I want to save that for next week. Because that's an interesting thing, interesting tidbit
That's true. That's true.
about Heir,
That's true. I didn't think
about
about that, but
yeah, because that's the interesting thing about Heir to the Empire being written prequels. Um, is what I'm hinting at here. Anyone who's read Heir to the Empire will might know what I'm talking about. I don't know what Wesley. I know you just picked up on
Anyway,
what I'm talking about, but
spoilers for next week. Come back next week if you're interested in whatever we're talking
yeah,
about. Sorry to be so vague about it, but David, how would you feel if they do or do not bring in the character of, at least in the general sense? Would you like to see Sabayoth on the big screen? Do you think it poses too many problems aside of what you're talking about for like a Jedi of any sort to be introduced in between the time of Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens? Do you think that poses too many problems that they'd have to fix? Do you think they should care about that and just write a good story that has the character in it and for really honestly
I
just forget
mean,
about
okay,
tying into the sequels?
okay. I don't think it, on the note of like, would they, or how would that work? I don't think it really matters to that point because of like, messing stuff up because they've already introduced so many Jedi who survived Order 66
That's true.
in some
That's
form
true.
or another. And even like Balin's Skull, they've already introduced other fallen Jedi in relation to Thrawn, so in some form or another. So it you know
Well, it's also too they could be introducing a character like Balin Skull to kind of take a spot for Sabayoth. There could also be that correlation. Um,
mhm. Which,
you
although
know,
I think the Balin Skull character, they're kind of wanting to, or Filoni was kind of doing something with expanding more upon like the Mortis gods thing with
yeah,
that
yeah.
character. I feel like, which I don't know how. Again, I know I've said this before. Don't know how they're going to go about continuing that story because obviously the unfortunate passing of Ray Stevens.
You know what's really sad
But
within all that is Ray Stevens brought probably okay, for me, definitely probably the most interesting character, or one of the most interesting characters from the Ahsoka series.
mhm.
Because they didn't do a whole lot with him, there was so much mystery surrounding him, and I wanted more from it. But, there's just he brought one of the best, he did such a great job with the character, and you just are left wanting so much more. And I am curious to see how they go about doing it moving forward. I know obviously there's a lot to consider for them behind the scenes. Um, but yeah, it is interesting to see obviously the arc or the storyline specifically what they were trying to do with the Mortis gods is something that is really intriguing, and I do hope they dive more into. Obviously,
So
too, they were diving into that a little bit with Anakin as well.
mm,
So I think it is something that they are going to follow, but it will be interesting to see how they go about doing that.
because I feel like kind of the way they left Ahsoka season one, I feel like the way they're kind of the thing they're going about it is they're splitting off, you know, Ezra and Thrawn, all the characters that are still in the main galaxy to go to air like to go all to like Heir to the Empire and stuff, and then they're
Hmm.
kind of leading Ahsoka, Sabine, and Baylan Skull to kind of continue like in an Ahsoka season two more into the that realm of stuff like the Mortis arc, which
Yeah,
honestly I would like to. Honestly, some people would probably get bored with that with a show that dives that deep into like the inner workings of the Force, or at least a live action show. Because I know I know well Rebels did some with like Bendu and a lot of the temples that they visited, and I know it's like season six of Clone Wars dived a lot into that, like when Yoda met the Wills and stuff. It was kind of not so much action, a lot of like you know Force discovery, which I don't know
yeah,
how well that would translate to a live action show, but I still think that would be cool to see.
yeah. I think I don't know. Disney's going to do the wrong thing no matter what. I've come to expect that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I agree. I think a show that gives you a lot of like knowledge within that base and kind of like okay, obviously, David, occasionally we have these episodes here where we talk about and briefly read over the Wikipedia articles, right? There is so much information out there. We don't have to have it on screen, but I think being able to see it on screen and also be able to get a basis for what canon Disney Star Wars like where they're at, because we can say, oh yeah, all this over here, but what is actually canon, what is not, and then also there would be some really cool aspects that would be interesting to see within diving into the Mortis gods and into the Force. Like obviously, we got to see the thing bringing back the world between worlds, but we got to see Anakin again, and a brief little fight between him and Ahsoka, and all the dealings, like all that stuff. Like that was really cool to see, and that kind of
Mm.
put some more of the Force into perspective for us. So like you can do it and still get some of that action, but I do agree it would be an interesting take on it because it wouldn't be a show specifically filled with action.
I doubt Disney would do it either for one specific reason, and that's the fact that it wouldn't be a show for casuals. Like
Yeah.
it would be a show almost okay, yes, there are ways to make it more entertaining for people who are just casual Star Wars fans, but it would really be a show for the die-hard Star Wars fans.
And God forbid Disney actually puts out something for them.
Yeah. But heck, make it
Yeah.
animated. We don't care. Like something like that would be awesome to see.
Yeah.
And
Um
in this other galaxy that they stranded Ahsoka in, they could even introduce more characters like Bendu or some of like the Bendu. Sorry, I think I
mhm.
said Bendu earlier, or just Bendu earlier. It's the Bendu, or he's the Bendu. Anyway, side note,
The
tangent, whatever.
Grinch.
But they could introduce other kind of interesting characters in the Force in this other galaxy because there's not there's really unlimited possibilities with that.
Yeah. And I do think that's a good thing to do because that helps out a lot. David, this interesting thought just smacked me upside the head, and I want to know what you think of it. What if there's somewhat of a time differential between, obviously, maybe they can't do this because of Thrawn being over there. But what if there's some kind of a time differential between the galaxy that we know in Star Wars and like when they left and when they are in the other galaxy, and when Thrawn ends up getting back, he comes back to a universe post um the sequels.
Well, I thought that when at the end of the Ahsoka series, like Hera and stuff were there when Ezra
Do
and
they have
Thrawn
it
got
come
back.
back?
Yeah,
Maybe they do. Well, I was thinking
yeah.
because, in all honesty, I don't know. They really do need to just kind of forget the sequels when they're making this stuff because it doesn't fit. And they're gonna try and find a way to make it fit, but I feel like they're constraining themselves a little too much to try and make it fit. And I don't know if it's gonna really work for them to make the Heir to the Empire movies without having the original cast of Luke, Leia, and Han. Um, And even if they don't focus on them as main characters, you gotta explain where they're at and why they're not a part of the main fight, fighting this new threat while trying to develop the new galactic empire. And then you have to figure out how that all goes down, and then how they don't destroy it enough for the First Order to rise up within the same period of time to become what it becomes and make the Reliance, the new or the new Galactic Republic, turn into another band of rebels. Like they
Again,
basically they
it's
screwed up.
so dumb that in the sequels, at least the beginning of the sequels, that there's a Galactic Republic and a resistance against the First Order. It's so dumb. A Galactic Republic that presumably has a military.
You would think.
It's dumb. Anyway,
Thrawn.
um, we always seem to come back to this harping on Disney.
David, I don't know. It's hard not to. Disney sucks right now, and they're making Star Wars suck. And if we talk about Star Wars, we gotta talk about Disney, and bada bing, bada boom, it's the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
I apologize for anyone who actually listens to this and gets tired of us harping on Disney. Although I don't know how many people actually like Disney. Disney's been like I think people still watch their stuff, but like recently with what they've come out with recently, it's mostly all sucked.
Mm. Well, okay, but
Like
even then,
name a good thing that they put out recently.
how recently?
It's in the past 5 years. 5 years would include the Infinity War movie, and we're not going to include that. So movie maybe no, it wouldn't include Infinity War. It'd include Endgame,
In game.
which Endgame wasn't bad. Which Endgame was still good. So past 3 years, 2020 and up. No, because Mandalorian came out in 2020. 2021 and up.
Well, that would be Mandalorian season 2. But I get your point though.
Been
It
few and far between, no matter what.
okay, but even then, and this is not just a what I'm about to say is not just a problem with Disney. It's really all Hollywood at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, what? Okay, in the past, like let's say the past 15 years, has there been have there been many movies that are going to be as culturally significant as Star Wars? The first Star Wars is today, 50 years, nearly 50 years after it first came out. Think about that. In like 3 more years, Star Wars will be 50 years old.
Yeah, it's pretty
Is there
cool.
a movie now there is a movie made more recently that will be as culturally significant? Like, yeah, maybe some of the Marvel movies. Maybe. But at the same time, I'm not sure. Like, I think the last couple movies that, were that, like, culturally significant might be like, you know, you might be able to make an argument for, like, Pirates of the Caribbean movies, the Dark Knight movies. I think you could definitely make an argument for Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
But like 2010s and up, I don't know of any movies that are going to be that culturally significant.
Well, I mean, obviously, Marvel got its start then, and I think once you hit probably Civil War, that was pretty cultural significant. And up, most of those movies were really good, as well as like things that people really talked about. Now, will they have the same effect and longevity that movies like Star Wars and movies like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter will have? No, but I think most of that is because Marvel made a lot of movies. There's a lot to
Hmm.
watch in that. Whereas, like Lord of the Rings, very long movies, but there's only three of them. Star
Hmm.
Wars, there's a lot to Star Wars right now, but if you want to watch what was the core of Star Wars, there's only 3 to 6 movies that you have to watch,
Or,
depending
or
on what you
or
want to
like
watch. Harry
even like going
Potter's
back to
eight books, 8 movies,
eight
I think.
movies. But even going back to
7 books,
like
8 movies, I think.
um back to the 80s, like stuff that's still culturally significant like Back to the Future or Indiana Jones, or even moving up to the 90s, you get some, uh, like Jurassic Park and stuff. Like you get some, you know, very
Well,
influential
David,
movies that
maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe we'll get lucky. And I know it's still within the same vein of Star Wars, but maybe when these Heir to the Empire movies come out, maybe they'll be the next culturally significant uh
maybe,
step. But I'm
maybe,
not hoping
but
for it because, it's still Disney. But David, I will say this much. we probably briefly before we end up finishing this episode should get back on the topic of Thrawn just briefly so that we actually can say that this episode was about him.
Because I feel like we had a good, 15, maybe 20 minutes talking about Thrawn there at the beginning, and then we just completely went off the rails. Anyway,
What else is new? So David, I do want to. I know we've already touched on it, but talking about what happens in his canon appearance in Rebels, obviously, at the end of Rebels, what happens? Ezra uses the what are they
Pergil,
called? The whales, the
Pergil,
pergola, and
Pergil.
pergola, and he takes the pergola, and him and Thrawn sit underneath it, and they have a nice glass of lemonade and chill. No, anyways, he uses them, and they take him to this other galaxy. Um, but it's like, you think about it, the only reason they were able to beat Thrawn was because Ezra sacrificed himself, doing something Thrawn didn't think was gonna happen. But it's like they still have to beat him now. You know, like they made him. Thrawn is a different kind of overpowered character. You know, like there's really going to have to be some thought put in when they do finish out what they've done in Ahsoka and moving
Mm.
into the movies and all. There's going to have to be some actual real thought, and hopefully they can do it, and they have the brain power, I hope, to actually put in the thought to figure out how to beat a character like Thrawn, because they have already in canon Star Wars and what he's in the comics, they've built him up to be such a overpowered character within how smart and how you know how he's blue Sherlock Holmes. Like, you know, he's not wrong most of the time.
One thing that I would love for them to do, and this, hopefully, this can happen. Hopefully, Kathleen Kennedy can retire so this can happen because she's already said that they're not going to recast any more legacy characters because she blamed that on why Solo bombed, which may be part of it, but that wasn't why Solo bombed. But
How? Well, go ahead and say what you're saying, and then I got something I want to ask you.
but one thing I would love for them to do for Heir to the Empire, and it might screw up with the sequel stuff, which whatever. But one thing that I
Screw the sequels.
would love for to see is to beat Thrawn in however many movies they end up making with this. To beat Thrawn, it takes, you know, uh, Luke and Leia and Han and Ezra and Ahsoka and Hera and all these characters that they have, and Din Djarin, all these characters they have in this time period. Takes all these characters coming together to actually beat Thrawn.
And doing
Okay, we're
something
getting
completely unorthodox.
okay, we're getting into Avengers level territory here, but still.
Hey, it's Disney. They probably want to do it anyways. But David, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. How would you feel if they did bring in what's his name who played Han Solo in the Solo movie and maybe came up with a recasting for Leia and for Luke and didn't go the
So
deep fate route, but they did that for the Heir to the Empire trilogy?
I don't know if you've seen the pictures, like the set pictures of the double they used the deep fake over for the CG Luke. He looks like a young Mark Hamill already.
Yeah, I've seen those. He does look pretty good in the role.
So why can't we just get him to play? I mean, you know, maybe you could also do, add in. Mark Hamill's voice like you've already done in
Mm,
the Book of Boba Fett and stuff, but
yeah.
have him play Luke, have Alden Ehrenreich play Han, recast Leia, and you could
I know
even
she.
go the route. You could even go the route of. I know I'm not supposed to be talking about the book, but I'll just make this one point here. But you could even go the route of Leia being pregnant with Ben instead of the twins in as like in the book. You could even have Leia being pregnant with Ben as a part of the story.
Hmm. Um, get. I know she's already been in Star Wars per the sequels, but who cares about that? Get Carrie Fisher's daughter to play her. Who's gonna hate on that? If she does a good job in the role, who's gonna hate on them casting Carrie Fisher's daughter to play Leia?
And you see that would actually work out really well because okay, so I don't know if you know if you've heard anything about this, but apparently right now there is a loss or Disney's going through a lawsuit because of bringing back Peter Cushing, the CG Peter or Tarkin in Rogue One. Some of Peter
Huh?
Cushing's friends are suing Disney because
I
I,
thought
I
that they
don't
had the rights per the family.
I don't know all the specifics about the lawsuit. But
Okay.
I just know there is a lawsuit going on right now about the CG Tarkin.
Hmm.
If they got Carrie Fisher's daughter to play Leia, that would like okay, one, you wouldn't be um disrespecting Carrie Fisher by making a CG version of her of a younger Leia, which is why they
Mm-hmm.
didn't do that in the Ahsoka series, why they just had C-3PO, basically relaying the message from Leia.
Yeah.
So you'd have that, and you'd also have you know her daughter carrying on that legacy. No, I don't feel like anyone would get mad at that, like you said.
Yeah.
And
And in all honesty, like you said, the guy who plays Luke, he's not he's not Mark Hamill, but he doesn't look that far off from a young Mark Hamill. And obviously he's already played the role of Luke in the TV series this year. And I feel like Mark Hamill would kind of give his blessing for that. And then we've already seen the young Han Solo. Han Solo, Harrison Ford himself could care less about what they do with Han Solo. He was happy enough that they killed him off. And I personally don't think that what's the guy's name? The actor who played young Han Solo?
oh, Alden Ehrenreich.
Okay, that was the name coming to mind, but I didn't think that sounded right. It sounded too Star Warsy, so maybe he's perfect for the role. But I don't think Alden Ehrenreich actually did that bad of a job. I think a lot of the mannerisms he got down pretty well for Solo. Solo was a bomb for a bunch of other reasons besides people not particularly caring for the casting of it.
Okay,
I
like
think that in a different role, in a different movie, he would do just fine. There
okay,
are some aspects.
I I know people who didn't go see Solo and still haven't seen Solo because they recast uh on Solo. But that is the vast minority of people who either didn't see Solo or don't like Solo.
Yeah.
Solo, people didn't care because it was kind of a dumb idea to begin with. And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't like it because, okay, even though I personally like Solo better than most people,
Uh-huh.
it's still not a good Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it's not a bad movie, but it doesn't feel like Star Wars.
It's not a bad movie, but it's not a good Star Wars movie.
Yeah. Mhm. Um, Now, for those of you who maybe are thinking that we're overlooking the character of Chewbacca, Chewbacca has been who he's been for a while now, so they've already I mean, obviously Chewbacca wears a costume, but they already kind of have the casting for Chewbacca, so that would not be a issue. Um,
Mm,
you know, uh, but I did want to mention that, obviously they forgot him in A New Hope, so we don't want to forget him here.
mm.
We got
Well, I know.
justice for Chewbacca.
Don't think. Um,
Are you sure you know it?
Hold up. Let me fact check myself before I say something stupid.
David, don't worry. You say something stupid all the time. It's what we expect from now.
Yeah.
Now, it's what we expect now. There we go.
Well, okay. Obviously, with on the note of Chewbacca, obviously, uh, Peter Mayhew passed away in 2019. But I don't think he played Chewbacca in at least all the sequels. I don't know if he. Hold up, let me see here. So,
I'm pretty sure that if nothing else, they did get the other guy, whatever the actor's name is, they did get him to come in. Like that's when they first
okay.
started doing that.
So
Because I
so
think Peter
Peter
Mayhew had some
Mayhew,
problems with his knees.
yeah. So Peter Mayhew shared the role of Chewbacca with Jonas Suetoma in The Force Awakens. So for part of it, he was in the costume. For part of it, this body double was in the costume. But Suotomo took over the role of Chewbacca in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So Peter Mayhew has already had already kind of stepped away from Star Wars before his passing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, uh yeah, I honestly think that it won't really make much sense if they just go with the cast of Rebels and stray away from what's happening all with, Luke, Han, and Leia. Like they just had a big impact with what's going on with the, downfall of the Empire. They're not going to be too busy to deal with this threat, you know? Like per what we've been reading in Heir to the Empire and what we're going to get to next week, uh, there's a lot of politics to the going on here with the demise of the Empire and the reformation of the new Galactic Republic. But that's something that honestly Luke and Han specifically could care less to have to deal with, and Leia is getting fed up with the politics of it too because we've talked about this. For the most part, the politicians don't change from the Empire to the New Republic, and from that, from the Old Republic to the Empire, and yada yada yada. I said it in the wrong order, but you get what I'm saying. Like the politics more or less stay the same. It's just who's controlling them. And so they're out for their best interest, not for the best interest of their people. And we kind of see a lot of that going on here in some of the politics that we get to see within the book. But yeah, they would hands down, they would be a part of the fight. They wouldn't say, "Oh, that's a minor issue," you know. They kind of touched on that in the Ahsoka series, somewhat, but I don't feel like the real Leia, Han, or Luke would
Well,
say that's a minor issue.
also, you know, going back to the thing of recasting, I feel like because Kathleen Kennedy, said again blamed Solo failing on recasting Han Solo, but
Hmm.
did she forget that, like, you know one of the most beloved characters and actors in Star Wars. One of the most beloved actors from Star Wars is Ewan McGregor, who was a recast.
Yeah, that's very true. Ewan McGregor was the young Obi-Wan before Alan Ehrenreich was the young Han Solo.
Yeah, it,
Yeah, and yeah, in all honesty, who is more beloved? Like Alan Alec Alec Guinness. Wait, yeah, wait,
Alec Guinness, yeah,
yeah.
old
I
Han,
don't know
or
why it
old
sounded so
Obi Wan, yeah,
I don't know why it sounded so bad in my head, wrong in my head, but anyways, he is probably the obviously I understand, he didn't have as big of a role in the original trilogy, but who's the more beloved character? Who do you think of when you think of Obi-Wan Kenobi? First off, you think of Jesus, and then you think of Ewan McGregor, because he's space Jesus. But so is Qui-Gon Jinn, so we're a little confused here. But then in reality, the space Jesus is Anakin because he's the chosen one. So now we're really confused.
yeah.
Uh, David, have you seen that meme? Have you seen that meme where it's like, it's like my grandmother's Catholic and she has a picture of Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan on her mantle. She thinks it's
Oh yeah,
Jesus.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, can't break it to her. But anyways, yeah, it's not a recasting issue. It's Kathleen Kennedy is so out of touch with the Star Wars fan base, and it's just bad. But David, we've hated on her, we've hated on Disney, we've been hating on them a lot today. We've been talking about this for about an hour and a half. We have gotten to Thrawn. To be fair, we have gotten
You
to
know what?
Thrawn, and
You know
this
what? I'll wrap everything up with just this. I'll actually be nice, somewhat nice to Disney for once. Canonizing the character of Grand Admiral Thrawn was one of the best decisions that Disney Star Wars has made.
And they have done a really good job with how they have portrayed him.
Yes.
Pretty
Yes.
spot on with how they've done that. So props to them for that. So I understand for anyone who maybe was expecting a deep dive into Grand Admiral Thrawn, maybe being a little disappointed, but just think of this episode as part one of a three-part series that we are going to be doing over the next couple of months on Grand Admiral Thrawn, more or less. We will dive into a lot more of him in the upcoming months, specifically next week for Heir to the Empire book. So maybe this kind of just got you, intrigued about the character, and you'll come back and want
Well,
to listen to it next time. Uh,
actually,
that's
I'm
the
pretty
hope.
sure we're probably going to be talking about Thrawn a good bit over, well, probably over the next, definitely the next year, but probably over the next couple years, because obviously, like, because we're talking about, we're starting to move through Clone Wars. We're probably going to skip over Bad Batch for now. We haven't discussed it, but we're probably going to skip over Bad Batch for now because we've already touched on a lot of Bad Batch. So we might save that for a few years down the road once it's kind of, you know, settled and we can
More
talk.
later we watch.
Yeah. So probably the series we're going to be talking about next, after, again, we haven't discussed it, so it's not set in stone, but probably this time next year we're going to be talking about Rebels, and probably going to be around the time when Thrawn is introduced. So we're probably going to be talking about Thrawn a lot over the next year. So
And then once the movies come out and maybe Ahsoka season
yeah,
2, we'll be seeing a lot of Thrawn. So be getting ready for it. We are just touching base with some of the basic stuff of Thrawn, and me and David are very long-winded and get off track very, very easily. So that's how we ended up with this episode. But hopefully we'll stick back on track a little bit better next week. These episodes, as a behind the scenes look, are very, very unprepared. We usually come in here planning to be unprepared for it. So we apologize for that. We just like some episodes to be a little less work behind. Me and David are very busy, so bear with us on this. But we will be talking about Grand Admiral Thrawn a lot moving forward. David, do you have any
So,
final thoughts on the character?
um, as I said before, he is one of the best characters that I would honestly say probably. I don't know if he's the best character, but one of the best characters, definitely that Rebels introduced into canon. Obviously he's a legendary character from Legends. Um,
Yes.
even before he was brought into canon, into kind of the more mainstream Star Wars, even people who hadn't read the books, like when you said Grand Admiral Thrawn, they were like, "Oh yeah, that's the blue guy." Like he was a
It
very
rang a bell.
very well known character even before he was brought into mainstream Star Wars. And so
Hmm.
I am very curious to see what they're going to do with him in canon. I'm
Hmm.
also very curious to see where the books take the character of Thrawn, because obviously he's such a popular character for a reason. And I see
Yeah.
it having, a little bit having read Heir to the Empire, but obviously there is a lot more to Thrawn in the books that I haven't read yet.
Yes.
So I'm really looking forward to seeing that as well.
Yes. Yes. All right. Were you ready to go ahead and wrap this thing up?
Let's go.
All right. Well, thank you everyone who has stuck around to the very end of this episode. Be sure to leave a like, comment down below, tell us what you liked about the episode, what you didn't like about the episode. Tell us if you learned anything in this episode. And your thoughts about Thrawn. As we said, we are talking about Heir to the Empire next week, so be sure to join us next week on X-Wing Radio if that will interest you. See you next time.